Well,
We start to talk to our neighbors again.
Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a great time catching up. And we're going to get started with this morning's Sunday Morning Zen program in just a moment. Before we do that, it really is a sincere pleasure for us to be able to deliver programs like Sunday Morning Zen and Commit to Sit free of charge to the folks here in the Sangha. And we really do put a lot of effort into making these programs as enriching as possible. And we're wondering if you could help us. I'm going to put a link in a moment to our Dana portal, and we would sincerely appreciate it if you just take a moment to help take this burden off and help us be able to know that we're financially supported and able to continue delivering programs like this to you. It just makes it a lot easier when we know that we have the support to continue delivering these programs and being ambitious about the new programs that we're offering. So thank you very much. You'll see the link come up in just a moment. This morning, Sensei is going to announce this morning's speaker. So I'll turn it over to Sensei.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Good morning, Ben. I am so happy that my Dharma sister, Mushim Ikeda Nash, has joined us today from Oakland, California. And of course, we also know Mushim's cousin, who is Reverend Jiko Nakade at the Daifukuji Soto Mission in Honolulu, Hawaii, on the island of Hawaii. So Mushim is currently a socially engaged Buddhist teacher, a mindfulness meditation teacher, and social justice activist, and also a diversity and inclusion facilitator based in Oakland. She teaches primarily at the East Bay Meditation Center there, which is, I think, one of the most diverse sanghas in America, if not the most diverse sangha. She served on the board of directors known as the Leadership Sangha for 7 years. She's an editor, writer, and poet. You've probably seen some of her essays in Shambhala Sun or Tricycle, as well as in books. She's the co-editor of Making the Invisible Visible, Healing Racism in Our Buddhist Communities. She also received a 2014 Gil A. Lopez Peacemaker Award from the Association for Dispute Resolution of Northern California, recognizing her innovative one-year program, Practice in Transformative Action, a mindfulness training for social justice activists at the East Bay Meditation Center. And she received an honorary Doctor of Sacred Theology from the Star King School for the Ministry. So here she is, Mushim. Welcome.
thank you so very much, June. And I'm just switching back to gallery view so that I can look at more of you. And I see that you're on two screens. So that's wonderful. There are 32 of us here gathered in a virtual spiritual community this morning. So thank you for such a warm welcome. And that kind of like ruins the talk that I'm going to give, because it's about inclusivity in Zen Buddhist communities in the United States. And it's not really at all about your community, because I'm not with you, so I don't know. And the fact that I've been invited in is a welcoming and inclusive gesture. And as I was putting this talk together yesterday, I started out and I was writing down some of the examples of unwelcoming incidents that are true stories from my own and others' experience. So I won't belabor you with them, only to note that they are there. So again, this is not about your group. I'm talking more broadly in terms of how perhaps we can all co-engage to bring this beautiful practice that is called Zen Buddhism to more people, not in an act of missionary proselytization, but as a way of including the people that, and actually many diverse people who are attracted for whatever reasons, and many different reasons, to Zen Buddhist groups in the United States. I am a United Statesian. I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and raised in the Midwest. So I'll speak for the United States for myself as an American citizen. And I've also done Zen training in Toronto, Canada, as part of my own experience. So this is the premise that I'm coming from. That when people arrive, and I was originally trained to be on the staff of the temple in Ann Arbor, Michigan, the Zen Buddhist temple, which is where I started my training in 1982. So my assumption is when people show up in virtual or in real space to a Zen group in the United States, my assumption is something has brought you here. It's not all the same thing. It could be something you've read, something you've heard, a friend. It could be just a feeling. It could be curiosity, but something has brought you here. And then for me, the question arises, well, what is it? And to perhaps learn how to engage with people in very direct ways, which you may already be doing, to say, how would you like to be welcomed? We recognize that people come from many different cultures, different backgrounds, different abilities, different personalities. So how is it that you would like to be welcomed? And what do you need to help you feel included and that you belong here? And this can be a really, really fascinating dialogue. I personally think it's one that's vital to the survival, actually, on a larger scale of Zen in the United States, because I think probably the demographics would bear me out if we had some figures that many Zen groups, not all, in the United States at the current time contain a lot of aging baby boomers. I'm 67, so this is my generation of aging baby boomers, and maybe predominantly white converts. And so those demographics point in a definite direction. So younger people, people of color, multiracial folks, diverse people, if they feel drawn to something in Zen for whatever reason, we might learn how to create forums to ask, what brought you here? How would you like to be welcomed? And what is it that helps you to feel you belong and that you're included and seen and valued and recognized? So I'll take a step back and say that my name is Mushim Patricia Ikeda. Mushim is a Korean Zen Buddhist name, Dharma name I received in May of 1983 in Toronto, Canada. And Patricia is the name my dad gave me. Ikeda is our family name. And I'm a third generation Japanese American, or Sansei. I am zooming in from unceded territory of the land of the Confederated Villages of the Lishan Ohlone, otherwise known as Oakland, California, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. So what I've proposed in really wonderful conversation with June is over a number of weeks, and I don't know, maybe months, we started to dialogue, is to speak about meditating and healing in a traumatized world. So I teach mindfulness meditation for the most part because it's most accessible to more people, and can't get over the Zen training. I've been both a monastic and lay person. It's because I like a baby duckling. That's how I've been imprinted. And I do have the Zen name, Mushim, which is the same, by the way, as Mushin, Mushin, in Japanese Zen. Same word, horrible word from the Heart Sutra. So it's a Heart Sutra name, and I don't know what translation you all use, but often it's chanted, no eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind. So you hear all those moos in there, moo this, moo that, moo this, moo that. So the final no mind is mushin in Japanese, mushin in Korean. So it means no heart mind. And so what I propose to bring to you is to say that in my experience, mindfulness meditation and Zen meditation in the United States, and we'll be talking more about Zen, can be both inclusive and exclusive, both healing and traumatizing. So it's not one or the other, it's both and. All depending, in my experience, on people's lived experiences and how and if they are met with care during meditation practice and in their community. And we will have time for some community dialogue and Q&A. So as most of you know, the word Zen is a Japanese word, and it's from a very, very old tradition in Buddhism, which, as I understand it, is a minority. It's gotten like major press because of the beat poets and the way that it came to the United States. However, numerically speaking, kind of tiny yet significant in Asia. So Chinese Chan, Korean Son, Japanese has Soto Zen and Rinzai Zen, to my knowledge, Vietnamese Tien. And I'm most familiar with the Japanese and Korean lineages of Zen in the United States in terms of practice. So again, speaking in some broad generalities, and it would be great to go on at some point if you all are interested amongst yourselves to break it down and become more nuanced. So I'm just trying to do a sort of a broad landscape thing here from my point of view, is that Zen has been transmitted to the United States with a lot of emphasis on the formal practice and the way that it's embodied and lived in the practice setting is through many forms and rituals. Lots of forms, lots of rituals. One of my teachers, Zen teacher Norman Fisher, here in California, who founded a group called Everyday Zen after many years of more formal training. I think he was one of the abbots of San Francisco Zen Center too, said, Yeah, he said in his Norman way, he said, Zen is kind of like a cult of cloth and food. So there's a lot of cloth in formal Zen settings, and you're a lay group, so I'm looking at you, and I don't know if there's a dress code or something like that. However, in many Zen temples, there's a pretty strict dress code, and there's a lot of cloth for the ordained, like pounds and pounds of cloth, a lot of cloth. I'm very bad at cloth, by the way, so this is part of my, yes, June is spreading the wings, like a lot. Okay, there's a lot of flapping here. Yeah, a lot of cloth, and then the food, as many of you may know, that there is a formal way of eating in Zen temples, which has a history and has a utility. It's not a meaningless form in the least. It's very meaningful. It's very meaningful. It reduces waste. And it means that if you can feed a large group of people without having a lot of dishes to wash, and it increases consciousness around waste and the environment. So that's called usually oryoki in the Japanese form of Zen. And when I was in monastery in Korea, they called the eating bowls the paru. But same idea, this nested bowls, it's all tied up with cloth, and it's all very, very, very formal. And the meals are very prescribed in the way that things are done. So there is a cultural context of Zen forms and rituals that, in coming from parts of Asia, through my understanding, is much more homogeneous cultures. There's diversity everywhere. However, much more homogeneous cultures in terms of what we would call race and ethnicity, that have not translated particularly well into the United States mix of many, many different cultures, races, ethnicities, as well as the upholding of the individual and the various liberatory movements that we've gone through historically in the United States, and which are now in very high progress. The Black Lives movement for Black Lives Matter, Indigenous peoples movements are now going on, not only here in the United States, in very high swing in Canada, and of course, ongoing movements for women's rights and equality. And that's even older. That's more of my generation. So these days, right now, we're seeing movements to recognize the gender identities of many, many different people on a very large spectrum, which increases and expands our concepts about gender identity, and as well as biological sex. There's also ability and disability, access and accommodations. And once again, historically, Zen centers, I would say, have not been the greatest in this regard. And there has been a lot of forward movement made. So what I'm talking about is opening ourselves in appropriate ways to offer the beauty and the depth and the liberatory potential for people of diverse identities and identity groups, and especially for communities which historically have been marginalized in the United States. And here's where trauma enters in, because these are communities who are accustomed historically to being ignored, shoved around, and treated as though they're unwelcome, ignorant, and other, capital O. I think it's fair to say, and I hope you agree, and we can disagree, is that one of the greatest fears of a human being, any human being, is to be outcast and to not have a sense of belonging to a caring and supportive community, whether that community is large or small, and however that community defines itself as to what is a member of that community and what is not a member of that community. There have been books that have been written recently about this, again, this need to belong. So one of the greatest needs of a human being is to feel, I belong. I belong. That I won't be threatened. I won't be aggressed upon. I won't be treated unfairly. I won't be taken advantage of financially, sexually, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and so forth. And we know from hard experience that historically for Zen in the United States, that this has not, there's been a very mixed track record in that regard. There have been many ethical abuses, and there have been really wonderful movements now, more recently, for there to be professional organizations of Zen teachers in the United States, codes of ethics, processes of repair that are going on. And for me, as an observer on the scene for a long time, I'm really happy to see things going in this direction. From my own experience, profound healing within the tradition of Zen practice comes through a non-intellectual experience of what I'm going to call true homeness. So I just made up a word, true homeness. This deep and pervasive realization of, as Thich Nhat Hanh says, I have arrived, I am home. In the here and in the now. I am solid, I am free. In the ultimate, I dwell. I once wrote years ago, it was published in one of the Buddhist media, that my own experience of part of, I think, what the archetypal journey of how the story of the historical Buddha Shakyamuni has come down to us, and that each of us takes in our own way, is that when Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha who became the Buddha Shakyamuni, made his final stand and said, all right, I'm sick of this shit, and let's put an end to it. We're going to sit down we're going to plant my butt under this tree, and I will not rise. I will not rise until I have awakened. I have awakened to everything. And I have completed my quest in a certain way. And so my understanding is that that there is a realization that those of us who, of course, lesser than the Buddha, probably, certainly true in my case, can arrive at, in which at some point that we really understand in a non-intellectual way that our true home is this body, and if we're alive, this breath. And then we can be home anywhere. As my old friend Robert Aitken Roshi said, he lived to be very old, 93, and he had asthma, I think. And so at one point, we used to write each other letters. He was an old-fashioned correspondent, and he wrote me, he was having some kind of illness and a lot of fluid in his lungs. And he said, when I cough, the universe coughs. So that's not a statement of egocentricity. It's a statement of being at home in one's true home. This body, this breath, this moment, this relationship. So I'm looking at you on what my coworker at East Bay Meditation Center, Candy Martinez Carthen, our program and event director, calls the Brady Bunch tiles. I don't know if some of you remember the Brady Bunch, which was a TV show, and before Zoom, long before Zoom, it was a long time ago, and the whole family was an extended family, would appear on these little tiles with these heads, kind of like, hi, we're members of the Brady Bunch. So I'm looking at you and I'm relating to you. There are 33 of us now. So when we reach that point, and we may have to return to it many times, it is a deeply healing experience of I can't not belong. So there's a double negative there. I can't not belong. However, that having been said, let's back up from that's kind of an ultimate thing. Being treated in unwelcoming ways is traumatic to many people. It's just coming to people who don't have a lot of unhealed trauma. It's just going to come across as being kind of rude. However, it repeats and it replicates the trauma of being outcast and seen as other by, particularly it may be by people of color, by members of the LGBTQIA two-spirit community, by people with disabilities, and people in other groups that are targeted for oppression here and structural violence here in the United States. So I'll just give you a very light and funny example. Again, this is not about you. Funny, but something maybe that we could all think about as we go forth and how to create more welcoming and inclusive spaces wherever we are. It doesn't need to be about Zen at all, wherever we are, in our workspaces, in the community spaces where we operate, and as the pandemic begins to hopefully lighten up in its negative effects, that will be the commons that we will begin to rejoin physically, as well as the commons that we've established now. Probably there's no turning back in terms of sanghas that are live streaming and that we're going to continue to have some form online, because now we have attracted people from everywhere. And I'm seeing in the chat from Blair, thank you, that the Black and Buddhist Summit has been going on. Yes, very, very exciting. So just a quick example, and I hope you'll have a chuckle along with me. And then it does point to some deeper things and more serious things. So years ago, I was in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I went to meditate, do the morning zazen at a really pretty small Zen center, which at that point, I don't even know what they were called. However, it was headed by Richard Baker Roshi and a group of his students. And they had found this beautiful, beautiful physical facility that had been owned by a Tibetan group, built by a Tibetan group, and which is now owned by Upaya Zen Center. So the Zendo at that point was this wonderful, really cozy, I love Adobe, little Adobe room, and there were no windows. So it was lit very dimly by candles. And I was already an experienced Zen student, so, you know, I didn't expect for there to be any instruction in the Zazen or Zen sitting. So I just went in and plopped myself down, and I can sit, and I did, and everything was fine, and we were all silent and everything. And again, having been a Zen student, I felt at home, and it was nice, and it was small. And then they did the morning service, and a priest in robes, bless his heart, he was a very funny person. He passed of cancer some years ago. Robert came up behind me in the darkness, and he leaned over and he put a chanting card in my hand. And I have very poor sight, by the way. And he whispered in my ear, he said, "The good news is you get a chanting card. The bad news is it's too dark to read it." And it was too freaking dark. However, again, I just put it right up to my eyes, and I just kind of went along. And it didn't particularly alienate me because I was trained in a Korean lineage Zen temple in Ann Arbor, where, you know, we did give a class for beginners, but if you weren't in that class, no one ever told you anything. And like, we did try to be friendly and welcoming, but our forms were actually not inclusive at all. And certainly if someone had a disability, we didn't have a wheelchair ramp at that point, or low visibility, not very good eyesight, things like that. It just wasn't that accessible, nor was it welcoming. So not surprisingly, many people came and many people left. So what we want to go towards, I feel, this is just me, is trying to create a new Zen center of the 21st century, where there's a lot of awareness and ongoing education and willingness and eagerness to learn how we can be more inclusive, diverse, and welcoming, while still transmitting the essence of Zen as we understand it, that can be of benefit to many people. So what I think we want to move away from is the equivalent of a newcomer coming in and seeing people do the equivalent of the secret handshake, signifying that you're in the club or you're not in the club. What we want to go away from is the realization that no one's going to tell you the rules or provide you a buddy or provide a welcome that immediately makes you, helps you to feel included. And before the pandemic set in, I went with a friend of mine who's also a Buddhist teacher at East Bay Meditation Center, who has been reclaiming his childhood, his growing up religion was Christianity. And there is a wonderful church, I think it's Presbyterian, in Berkeley that is, well, it's very large and has a very, very large queer community, so large that they don't need to have an affinity group. And 2 women are the pastors. So I was there and it was just really nice. And at a certain point of the service, they said, raise your hand if you're new to our church. So I put up my hand, and get this, 2 people were circulating around and came toward me. And one was one of the children who gave me a beautiful yellow flower. And that was followed up by an adult who gave me a pamphlet and said, please, you're so welcome. Come back, ask us any questions you like. And then at the end, I was invited along with everyone to come up to the front, and after the formal service was over, and take communion. And I have heard of Christian churches where you have to have been baptized and you have to have certain criteria to receive communion. And so I said to my friend, you know, I've never been baptized. I'm really not a Christian. And he said, oh, they're not like that here. And we stood and held hands, and they had, being Berkeley, organic grape juice and artisan bread, I think. And everyone shared and passed the plate to one another. So there was this feeling that we were all equalized, that no one was of some kind of spiritual elite. I felt so welcomed. So once again, welcoming is the opposite of an atmosphere that is felt to be experienced as unwelcoming. And the experience of feeling unwelcomed replicates the injuries and trauma of racism, of classism, of all of the isms. As I wrote in a chapter of a guidebook for Buddhist chaplains called 1,000 Hands, some of you might take a look at it if you haven't seen it. It's a very nice book. I was invited to write a chapter on for that Buddhist chaplaincy guidebook on diversity and inclusion. And so I talked about how for some of us, if we're coming from our places of unearned privilege, that meaning that we are people of goodwill, and we're making a wrong assumption that everyone is like us and has the same experience. So if we're able to comfortably walk into a Zen center and feel like, well, okay, you know, it's not like people are greeting me with open arms, but they're friendly enough. And okay, I don't know what these round cushions are, but oh, well, they're providing a chair, or I take yoga, I can sit down on the floor. So if I feel comfortable enough and I have the ability to do so, I'm going to come in and then I'm going to be able to orient myself. However, that is not the case for someone who does not have the same privilege that I do. So I compared this unearned privilege as like having like a computer chip that's been embedded in us that we don't know that's there. And we're used to, as we approach new places and buildings, we're used to, if they're automatic doors, we don't know that this chip is sending an electronic signal and the doors are just opening. Like when we go to a grocery store or something like that, and they just open and we just take it for granted and go in and shop. And we're not aware that not everyone has this chip. That has been the experience of many, many Black identified people in the United States, that when they were shopping before the pandemic, that they might be followed around by the security guard, they might be questioned, they might be interrogated. And so they can't just go and, you know, just buy things in peace, like people who are white identifying. And that this realization is something that is a fundamental, I will venture to say, form of awakening. We might not get it by sitting down on our Zen cushion and meditating for 25 years or more, because it needs to be, as Don Haney, the co-director of the Buddhist Peace Fellowship, said some years ago, that this is a form of awakening that needs to happen in relationship to other people, to people who are different from us. So the experience of people targeted for oppression really is exactly the opposite. Not only do doors not automatically open, instead, any everyday activity might be the cause not only of harassment and inconvenience, but of death and imprisonment. So therefore, we get the terms of driving while Black, the death of a Black child who went to buy some candy from a corner store. And at the moment, especially though not, this is nothing new, there's been a spike since the pandemic started of anti-Asian American and anti-Asian violence in the United States and in Canada. This is now just beginning to hit the mainstream press a little bit more. And I do urge you, if this hasn't come across your radar, to just Google. It's in the New York Times and in the mainstream media now, anti-Asian violence, in part because of the former president's insistence on calling COVID-19 the China flu and the Kung flu. So what can we do? I think American Zen might do well to become more knowledgeable, and the information is there. To become more knowledgeable about the trauma that people from marginalized and oppressed identity groups carry, and to create more trauma-informed spiritual practice places. Trauma-informed, and I'll hold up a book. I'm doing a training right now with psychotherapist and Vipassana practitioner, David Trelevin. And he has a book called Trauma-Sensitive Mindfulness. And he has a series of a training, as well as free monthly meetups that people from all over the world are attending. They are in English, on trauma-sensitive mindfulness. Trauma-informed spaces for spiritual practices, which we're trying to provide at East Bay Meditation Center here in Oakland, means that there's maximum transparency, that people are of course, offered as much information as possible about what will be happening during a particular activity or service or class in advance when they're welcomed in, and they are given very explicit welcomes, that on Zoom, the agenda is put into the chat, that people feel informed, that they can message the host and say, this is not working well for me. This is what I need. So transparency means no surprises or hidden agendas to the extent that we can provide that. That appropriate friendliness is demonstrated equally to all. That there's flexibility when we're in person around an insistence on silence, and there's flexibility around what might be perceived as messy behavior by some, and that by other people, they're coming from cultures which are very warm and very expressive, and where people love to talk over one another and all talk at once, and that is culturally what is appropriate. So I think leadership needs to demonstrate and embody warmth, respect, flexibility, transparency, humility, cultural humility, and willingness to learn. Being offered clear choices helps people to relax and to not feel trapped or ambushed. One feature of trauma is that it can result from people being forced to do things against their will in order to survive. So how do we create Zen communities where we feel safe enough and to enter into the fertile Zen state of not knowing, which means openness? So I think to enter into a state of not knowing, we first need to know that we will be safe enough, that we will be safe enough. Another book that I'll hold up, and then I'll bring this to a close, so we will have some time together, is Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. And whose the basic principles of emergent strategy, which you can find for free online, include a principle from activist Mervyn Mercado, which says that in order to develop community, we must, quote, move at the speed of trust. Move at the speed of trust. So I personally, again, this is me, think that Zen in the 21st century, if we are to survive in the United States and bring in more people from younger generations and from diverse communities and backgrounds, that we may need to look at how much cloth there is, that we may not need so many robes and forms and rituals. We do need some forms. And there are considerations of dress that maybe we don't need them so much. We might need to look in a society where so many people like myself are on computers, and it has been said, sitting is the new smoking. Sorry, folks. We may need to look at the insistence in many Zen groups on Zazen, specifically as sitting meditation. And I know that your Sangha has a very strong affiliated sacred dance, hula element added, and mindful movement. So yoga, qigong, tai chi, many forms of somatic mindful movement might be part of the ways that Zen is carried into the future. Thich Nhat Hanh, walking meditation. And that we might look into more democracy, more transparency, and more training of Zen leaders at every level. So I'd like to share with you in ending, do a screen share of a little manifesto that I came up with for my secular mindfulness for social justice activists, a year-long program a couple of years ago. And I thought, I just want to boil it down to them. This was at the end of a full year together of, this is just me, how to meditate. And I will share my screen. And read it aloud. So this is just me. And it was, this nice slide was designed by a designer from Spirit Rock when I gave a talk there, as part of their Black Indigenous People of Color, BIPOC Voices Sunday morning series that's been going on since last September. So how to meditate, keep it simple. Take care of your body and honor it as it is right now. So if you have chronic fatigue, chronic pain, as many of us do, honor it as it is right now. And take good care of it. Meditation practice is ordinary. It's seamless and interwoven with daily life. You actually don't need special clothes or gear. I like having a zafu myself. However, if I don't have it, if you've got some blankets or something, pile them up, do your best. Be open and quiet and fearless. Don't allow meditation to be commodified, please, because it's a natural activity for human beings. It's part of our birthright. Relax, open to what you can open to. Notice and observe with kindness. Try to be okay with confusion, ignorance, desire, being a hot mess. These are all perfectly natural human states. Just watch them with kindness and clarity. So here's where, when we welcome people into our community, our leaders can demonstrate this. All of these things, being confused, ignorant, filled with, like weird desires, this is all perfectly natural, making a mess. We watch them with kindness and clarity, and then we do what we can to help and harmonize. See and love yourself and others as you and they wish to be seen and loved. So when I read this, people always inevitably say, well, how do you know others wish to be seen and loved? And I say, that's where, again, we need to practice relational practice, because we can't assume on behalf of others. We need to, if we're willing to engage with others and say, how do you wish to be seen? How do you wish to be loved? Not that we can always provide everything. However, we can only know how we can recognize and love others in ways that come across to them as being recognized and loved if they give us that information. And if they do, that's an act of honoring. That's an act of trust. That's an act of faith in us, that we will extend to them what we can give. So thank you so much. We do have a few minutes. If you have insights, questions, I'm happy to try to be of service. And I don't know how you handle that. Do you generally ask people to put things in chat or raise hands?
Folks generally just unmute and join in.
Thank you so much. I want to say that was just such a wonderful talk. I feel like there's just so much there for me. I wanted to ask, is it possible that I could use that definition that you put up at the end to share with others?
Yeah, I can email it. I'll email it to June. And June, can you share it with Kelly and anyone else who wants it? Yeah, it's in the public domain. So yes, please do go ahead and share it. Thank you, Kelly.
I think your concept of homeness, I think that's a wonderful word. It really resonates with me. So thank you.
Thank you. And especially during the pandemic, there have been so many people who have lost their homes, and how we can belong when we can't physically be together breathing the same air in close proximity. That's our wonderful challenge right now, I think.
Mushim, thank you so much for this wonderful talk. There's so much to learn in this area. We've been struggling with this. Well, we've been trying to learn about it for years, and it's and we always thought we were pretty diverse, but then when we really looked around, we realized we're not that diverse. And but we're wearing robes this morning because we did a service, but generally we don't wear robes. And we worked very hard to take much of the formality out of Zen practice because it seems to be an obstacle for people. But I really thought when you were talking about that, how subtle that can be, the notion of being an in club and all the ways that gets communicated, either through clothing or you know, I was thinking about this. When we do services, we don't explain things to people. We have things people can read at their home for the sutra, but we really don't explain it. That's one area where we don't do very well, I think, in welcoming newcomers that wouldn't know about the service at all. But it gets more subtle, even in terms of language. We've worked very hard to teach mindfulness now in a very secular context using neuroscience and psychology, but keeping it in the context of waking up in terms of a Buddhist practice. But we've taken out most of the Buddhist terms in our beginning mindfulness classes because they can often sound kind of like an in thing, you know, even you don't realize this, we use a word like dharma, and most of us may know what that means, or we think we know what it means, but a lot of people don't. And so you use a word like that without then explaining it to people. And I think it can actually feel kind of threatening to someone to hear this kind of language when they don't know what the definition of that term is. And so I think there's these very small kind of microaggressions that are really unconscious that we don't even realize we're doing. For many years, we had a bumper sticker that we thought was really funny that said, honk if you don't exist, you know? And then I realized, you know, that's really just, that's an in joke. No one understands what we're talking. We're all laughing, thinking, I think it's really funny, but most people don't, they would think, well, that's horrible. What do you mean? You know? So I think we do a lot of things like that in practice that we just assume, especially if we're white and privileged, and then we make a lot of assumptions. And so I think this is a whole area where we have to really remain open to learning and being uncomfortable sometimes, because this is a huge area. And I'm so happy you talked this morning about it. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Sensei. And the thing is that in diversity, equity, inclusion work and at East Bay Meditation Center, we at EBMC, we have agreements for multicultural interactions, which I'd also like to share with all of you. And I'll send those to June Sensei that point to the fact that as we're relating to one another, there's an intent and then there can be an impact, which is different from what the intention is. So the intention can be to be kind or funny, or, you know, usually there's a good intent. And then the impact can exactly be the opposite. So for instance, I hadn't heard about your bumper sticker, which was what, honk if you don't exist, right? And I'll tell you that as an Asian American, the form of racism in which that I experience most frequently is being treated as though I don't exist. It's the syndrome of the invisible person, Asian American. I can't tell you how many times I've been in line with everybody else at stores and places, customer service desks, and I wait my turn and I get to the front and the person behind the counter looks directly over my head and says, "May I help you?" to the person behind me who is not Asian American.
Yeah.
And it's not because they're trying to discriminate against me. It's because they literally do not see me.
Yeah, so that bumper sticker is an example of how we can be really tone deaf.
Yes.
Really tone deaf.
Yes, and in order to reverse that, we need to have the willingness to, you know, maybe have a focus group and of diverse people and say, hey, how's this coming across? Our intent is to be funny. What's the impact for you? And then we're going to get some probably good feedback depending on how varied the focus group is. And some people might say, well, you know, to us it's funny. However, it's kind of the equivalent of the secret handshake. You know, and I have told some of my friends at San Francisco Zen Center, I'm formerly on the board and I love them. You know, when you're inside San Francisco Zen Center's practice centers, you're speaking in a certain way that's very meaningful to you. because of the teachings and the culture that's been built up. But when you go out, if you have a group, meditation group you're starting in a local youth center, or for people who are formerly incarcerated, who are new to practice and so forth, please stop with the Dogen. Stop quoting Dogen. No one knows what the hell you're talking about. And it's not meaningful to them. And it just sounds really, really weird. And yeah, so one younger priest said to me, Mushim, you're just giving me like $1 million worth of free advice. And I said, that's right, I have. So take my advice. Don't do Dogen. Because, you know, it's not that Dogen isn't a genius. It's that it comes across as alienating to people who are used to feel that they're being shut out of the key to whatever the language is everyone else is speaking.
Mushim, thank you so much. You have given us a wealth of information here that we really need to think about and be aware of how we are interacting as COVID, you know, clears up and we can start meeting each other again. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sangha. Is this the end of your Sunday morning service?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, if I might request, I don't know how you all end it. We're usually now inviting people to unmute and just say goodbye. Would that be all right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mushim. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
you.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
Roshi. Bye, Sensei.
Thank you.
Be safe, everyone. Be safe.
Fabulous.
Love you.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Sangha.
Thank you for your talk, Mushim. That's amazing.
Thank you. I could see you smiling from your square.
I heard a lot of things that clear my mind from my past and experience. Yeah, and I have to say, June, our center is pretty welcoming. I remember how I walk in, and I didn't feel comfortable at the beginning, but I still feel like I can come back again. Yeah. Thank you.
Exactly. And that's what we're aiming for. Wonderful reflection. Thank you. And I think the aloha spirit probably helps. It's really, really, yeah. Because it's very warm, right?
Yes.
All right. Be safe, everyone.
Bye.
Take care. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Rita.